My friend from Barbados this morning, and I asked, how do you greet someone from Barbados? And they say, Wagwanin or Wagwanin. I know I might be massacring it somewhat, but I hope you feel warmly welcome here in Kingston, Jamaica. But us here in Jamaica will say, Wagwan, welcome and thanks for joining us. And I also understand that we have some persons online from the UK, so we say a very special welcome to you. Y también tenemos amigos de Colombia, y por eso bienvenidos a ustedes y muchísimas gracias para estar aquí. Let me translate. I'm saying, my friends from Colombia, we say thank you so very much for being here. And it is not too late for me to wish you a happy new year. So happy 2026 to you and all the very best. So of course, just to zone into what we're doing here today, the National MPI provides a more holistic lens through which we can view poverty not only in terms of income, but in terms of the many dimensions that affect quality of life, such as education, health, living standards, and access to opportunities. The development of this index, led by the Planning Institute of Jamaica, PIOJ, in collaboration with the Caribbean Development Bank, CDB, the Oxford Poverty and Human Development Initiative, OPHI, and other key partners, provides critical insights into the deprivations that may not show up in consumption and helps to identify who is being left behind and why. Very, very critical data. Of course, we say thanks to our interpreters, and those interpreting services today are being provided by the Jamaica Association for the Deaf, JAD, and I want you to make them and our friends who are online who may be from the deaf community, we want to make them feel welcome. So at this time, ladies and gentlemen, though I have given you a welcome, the official duty to do so is that of Dr. Wayne Henry, Director General of the Planning Institute of Jamaica. And of course, we ask you to put your hands together for him as he comes to the stage.
Mr. Javon Keys, our moderator today. It's always a pleasure to have Javon with us. Dr. Stephen Kerr, Assistant Chief Education Officer, the Ministry of Education, Youth, Skills and Information. Mrs. Karlene Temple-Anderson, Senior Director in Enabling Environment in Health and Client Affairs Branch of the Ministry of Health and Wellness. Mrs. Andrea Edwards-Brown, Senior Director, Cross-Sectoral Coordination in the Early Childhood Commission, ECC. Ms. Portia Magnus, Director, National Insurance Scheme, Ministry of Labor and Social Security. Dr. Martine Baptiste, Division Chief, Social Sector Division of the Caribbean Development Bank, joining us online. Welcome, Martin. Mr. Elbert Ellis, Portfolio Manager, Social Sector Division of the Caribbean Development Bank, the CDB. Dr. Darren Newman, Advisor to the President, to the Vice President, Operations of the CDB. Ms. Marsha Gay Robinson, Deputy Program Manager, Information and Knowledge Management of the CARICOM Secretariat. Professor Sabina Alkire, Director of Oxford Poverty and Human Development Initiative, OPHI. Dr. Monica Pinella Roncancio, Associate Researcher of Oxford Poverty and Human Development Initiative and Consultant to Jamaica under MPI. Ms. Nikisha Walsh, Executive Director of the Students' Loan Bureau, SLB. Mrs. Eleanor Jones, Chairman and CEO of Environmental Solutions Limited, ESL. Representatives from the Office of the Prime Minister, the Cabinet Office, and the Ministry of Education, Skills, Youth, and Information. Representatives from our international development partners, the private sector, and civil society. PIOJ board members, and we welcome Colin Williams, and other members that may be joining online, and senior managers of the PIOJ. We welcome Deputy Director General Kerr Phillips, our esteemed panelists, and we look forward to the panel to take place. I recognize, of course, Mr. Easton Williams, who heads our social policy, Planning and Research Division, other government officials, ladies and gentlemen of the media, good morning and welcome. We said that list was so long, I could just say thank you very much. You know, and all right, let me behave myself and let's stick to the script here. But the truth is, two gentlemen were coming in from one of these functions late at night. One was quite fine, the other was a little tipsy. And they were walking along the road going home. It was night. And just off the road was a tree, and some nefarious individuals put bacon strips on the branches of the tree, trying to lure people so that they could rob them. So, of course, the guys walking, the two of them, and they see the bacon strips on the tree. The gentleman who's tipsy said, "A bacon tree?" Them friends said, "No, man, bacon can't grow on tree. That is foolishness. Don't pay no attention." But the man said, "No, it's a bacon tree." And so him go over to look at the bacon tree. And them friends said, "Boy, not go so." And sure enough, as he got close to the tree, the men jumped out at him, began to take his watch and his wallet. And the man started shouting out to him, "Friend, it is true, it's not a bacon tree. It's a ambush." It's a new year, I'm going to do better. Kirk, I'm going to do better. But let me say, today marks an important step in Jamaica's journey towards a more holistic measurement of national development. We are here to launch a new tool that strengthens how we understand, plan for, and respond to poverty in all its dimensions in our society. The Multidimensional Poverty Index, or MPI, is an evolution in how we define and address disadvantage. It complements our current monetary measure by not solely capturing what households consume, but what they lack in education, health, living standards, and employment. As articulated by the Sustainable Development Goals, the SDGs, as Javon mentioned, ending poverty in all its forms is a global imperative. And the national MPI reflects the government's commitment to supporting this effort. We aim to leave no one behind and to be data-driven in our approach. You may ask, why do we need an MPI? Jamaica has produced annual poverty estimates based on household consumption for over 30 years. We use the Jamaica Survey of Living Conditions to assess whether households fall below a defined poverty line, and we report on the share of the population that do. This method is rigorous and vital, but we recognized that we can do much more. Poverty is not reflected in consumption alone. A person may not fall below the consumption threshold, yet still face multiple and overlapping disadvantages, from poor housing and inadequate sanitation to being unemployed or excluded from school. The MPI captures these challenges and helps us make better policy and program decisions to eradicate them. In other words, it enhances our toolkit for planning and sharpens our ability to track development progress. With that in mind, the PIOJ provided the focal point for the design of Jamaica's Multidimensional Poverty Index, following in the footsteps of pioneering countries, while tailoring the measure to our national context. This achievement was made possible through the partnership and contributions of many stakeholders. We are grateful to the Caribbean Development Bank, the CDB, for both financial and technical support, and to the Oxford Poverty and Human Development Initiative, OPHI, for their expert guidance throughout the process. We also acknowledge the members of the MPI project steering and the technical committees, whose insights help shape the structure of the index, and the community members and stakeholders who shared their experiences during consultations. Come on, let's put our hands together for all our partners. From the outset, we made a deliberate choice to ground the index in the realities of Jamaican life. It is a measure built by Jamaicans for Jamaicans. Now that we have the measure, the real work begins, putting it to use. This index allows the government to identify multiple pockets of deprivation that a monetary measure by itself might miss, and to design and implement appropriate interventions towards those who need them most. It also enables stronger tracking and evaluation of poverty reduction strategies under the National Poverty Reduction Program, and supports evidence-based decision-making. Note carefully that the value of the MPI extends much beyond government. Civil society, researchers, and the public now have a tool to better understand the nature and dimensions of deprivation in Jamaica, to advocate more effectively, and to hold systems accountable. Finally, today's launch is the beginning of a new chapter in the way we assess and analyze poverty. The PIOJ commits to working with our partners to ensure that the index is actively used in planning and policy dialogue in all ministries, departments, and agencies, civil society groups, researchers, and citizens, and to aid in our attainment of the goal of ending poverty in all its forms. Thank you very much. Welcome again. God bless you all.
Thank you so very much, Dr. Henry. I always say whenever I host an event with Dr. Henry that you can be assured of some good humor. And that ambush joke was certainly one that I did not see coming, but very, very good, Dr. Henry. And really, we thank you so very much for contextualizing today's event for us and the importance of all the stakeholders that have ensured that we are here at this watershed moment today. Because I really want you to understand that, ladies and gentlemen, this is the first of its kind in this country. So you are holding in your hands a piece of history in Jamaica's development agenda. So that is a big deal. And of course, we also want you to really appreciate that it will take a whole of society approach beyond this document that we have prepared today. Now, speaking of partners, the Caribbean Development Bank, CDB, provided support for the development of the Multidimensional Poverty Index in the form of grant financing to the PIOJ to help create this very, very important document. We will now hear remarks from the representative of the CDB, Mr. Elbert Ellis, who will come forward. And he currently serves as Portfolio Manager, Social Sector Division, Projects Department at the CDB. And he's joined us all the way from Barbados. Ladies and gentlemen, put your hands together for him, please.
Mr. Javon Keys, moderator. Dr. Wayne Henry, Director General, Planning Institute of Jamaica, PIOJ. Dr. Stephen Kerr, Assistant Chief Education Officer, Ministry of Education, Youth, Skills, and Information. Mrs. Karlene Temple Anderson, Senior Director, Enabling Environment and Health and Client Affairs Branch, Ministry of Health and Wellness. Mrs. Andrea Edwards Brown, Senior Director, Cross-Sectoral Coordination, Early Childhood Commission. Mrs. Portia Magnus, Director, National Insurance Scheme, Ministry of Labor and Social Security. Dr. Martin Batiste, my reporting officer, who's Division Chief in the Social Sector Division at the Caribbean Development Bank. Dr. Darren Newman, my colleague and friend, Advisor to the Vice President of Operations at the CDB. Mrs. Marcia Gay Robinson, Deputy Program Manager, Information and Knowledge Management, CARICOM. Professor Sabina Alkire, Director, Oxford Policy and Human Development Initiative, OPHI. Dr. Monica Pinella Roncancio, Associate Researcher, OPHI, and Consultant to Jamaica in the development of the National MPI. Ms. Nikisha Walsh, Executive Director, Student Loan Bureau. Mrs. Eleanor Jones, Chairman and CEO, Environment Solutions Limited. Esteemed panelists, PIOJ board members, PIOJ senior managers, representatives from the Office of the Prime Minister, the Cabinet Office, and the Ministry of Education, Skills, Youth, and Information, other government officials, representatives from the international development community, the private sector, and civil society, participants online, ladies and gentlemen, members of the media, good morning. It is my pleasure to bring greetings on behalf of the President, management, and staff of the Caribbean Development Bank as we celebrate the official launch of Jamaica's first Multidimensional Poverty Index, or the MPI. This milestone strengthens the country's development policy architecture and reinforces Jamaica's commitment to evidence-based, people-centered progress. Chair, why does this moment matter? Today's launch is an important step forward in how Jamaica understands and addresses poverty within its long-term development framework. While income-based measures are important in analyzing poverty, they do not capture the full reality of people's lives. Poverty spans multiple dimensions, as we would have heard earlier: health, education, housing, access to services, employment security, and overall well-being. The MPI offers a more holistic, inclusive framework for understanding these interconnected deprivations. For decades, monetary poverty analysis has guided Jamaica's policy formulation, tracking income and consumption trends, and shaping social interventions. This approach remains essential and continues to inform elements of national policy. However, Jamaica, through the leadership of the Planning Institute of Jamaica, has recognized that achieving Vision 2020 Jamaica requires a broader view of development that prioritizes not only economic growth, but also human development, equity, resilience, and improved quality of life. By adopting the MPI, Jamaica takes an important step forward to more targeted, evidence-based, and equitable policymaking. The MPI complements monetary analysis by showing how deprivations intersect and persist, giving policymakers a clear picture, not just how many people are poor, but how they experience poverty. Importantly, the MPI applies a gender lens, recognizing that women, men, girls, and boys often experience poverty differently. Gender is central to well-being and a core principle of good development policy. Women and men often face distinct constraints and vulnerabilities shaped by differences in labor market participation, caregiving responsibilities, access to assets, exposure to risk, and decision-making power within households and communities. These differences are not always visible in income-based measures alone. By incorporating the multidimensional indicators and enabling sex-disaggregated analysis, Jamaica's MPI enables the country to identify gendered patterns of deprivation in areas such as education outcomes, access to decent work, housing conditions, or access to basic services. This approach aligns closely with Jamaica's commitment to gender equality and social inclusion, its broader national and international obligations, and the CDB's gender equality policy and operational strategy. In this regard, the MPI provides a stronger evidence base for gender-responsive planning, budgeting, and program design, ensuring policies better meet the needs of women, men, and vulnerable groups. CDB is very, very pleased to have supported this important initiative through its Enhanced Country Poverty Assessment Program, which is known more familiarly as the ECPA program. This program aims to improve access to timely, reliable monetary and multidimensional poverty data across the bank's borrowing member countries. These data are essential for evidence-based development at national and regional levels and for use by key stakeholders, including governments, CDB, development partners, researchers, and civil society. Through this program, CDB seeks to strengthen the capacity of countries to conduct multidimensional poverty assessments through hands-on training, support the ability to map different dimensions of well-being and progress. The program also enhances monitoring of progress towards the post-2015 Sustainable Development Goals and strengthens the evidence base that informs the bank's programming and policy dialogue. Colleagues, Jamaica's MPI stands as a strong example of how the Enhanced Country Poverty Assessment Program translates into country-owned, policy-relevant outcomes. What does Jamaica's MPI enable? It enables more precise identification of who is poor, how they are poor, and where deprivations intersect. It also supports the improved targeting and coordination of social protection and development interventions. And it supports the strengthening of Vision 2030 Jamaica and the country's commitments to the Sustainable Development Goals. In short, the MPI transformed poverty data into actionable intelligence. Jamaica's achievement reflects the strength of partnership and stakeholder engagement, as you would have heard earlier from Dr. Henry. CDB commends the PIOJ for its leadership in guiding the development of the MPI and for chairing the Project Steering Committee, which provided strategic oversight, ensured methodological integrity, and aligned the process with national priorities. Special thanks to Dr. Joy Brown, the local consultant for capturing community voices through a consultancy that was implemented during the early phase of the MPI's development to ensure that the voices of the vulnerable were heard and represented in the index to strengthen its robustness. And of course, special thanks to OPHI for providing technical expertise to the Jamaica team throughout the process. Together, these contributions exemplify effective partnership, local leadership, global expertise, strong governance, and meaningful participation. As Jamaica advances this important analytical tool, it does so in a context shaped by recent shocks. CDB recognizes the significant impact of Hurricane Melissa on communities across Jamaica, particularly on livelihoods, housing, and vulnerable subpopulation groups. These events underscore why multidimensional data are so essential. Hurricanes and other natural hazard events often deepen existing deprivations and vulnerabilities and create new ones across multiple dimensions of well-being. Tools such as the MPI can ensure that recovery and reconstruction efforts are inclusive, targeted, and responsive to real needs. In closing, CDB remains a key partner in Jamaica's recovery, resilience building, and continued development. We will continue to work with the government and stakeholders to integrate MPI evidence into policies and programs that strengthen social protection, human capital, and climate resilience. Today's milestone reflects CDB's broader commitment to inclusive and sustainable development across the Caribbean. Jamaica's MPI not only strengthens national policy making, but also provides valuable lessons to the wider region. The bank, and I want to close by saying, again, that we are delighted to support this important work and remain committed to partner with Jamaica as it transforms data into impact and evidence into improving well-being for all. Thank you, and very best wishes for a successful launch.
Ladies and gentlemen, another round of applause for Mr. Ellis. Really underscoring the kind of partnership and work that it took to get us to this place, and also reinforcing the uniqueness of this new approach that provides targeted, evidence-based, and equitable, provides data that will allow for targeted, evidence-based, and equitable policy making. And of course, it gives us an idea of how people experience poverty beyond just looking at the metrics of income. And one of the unique things that you pointed out, sir, is that it does provide data through a gendered lens, which is sometimes a gap, as you in this room would also know when it comes to data collection. So it allows us to be able to see the differences in how men and women experience poverty. And we look forward to seeing how we can take this actionable, intelligent data to make a difference in our country. And of course, speaking of partners, our progress towards implementing the MPI has been achieved through our partnership with the Oxford Poverty and Human Development Initiative, OPHI, at the University of Oxford. Now, of course, our subject expert, Professor Sabina Alkire, director of OPHI, was not able to join us here in Jamaica for a function this morning, but she has sent a video recording, and it's going to be looking at multidimensional poverty and its uses for poverty. Now, together with Professor James Foster, Professor Alkire developed a method that has become the foundation for many national and international multidimensional poverty indices, MPIs. Professor Alkire's work spans welfare, economics, the capability approach, the global poverty measurement, bringing both theoretical insight and policy relevance to today's launch. Now, previously she worked at the George Washington University, Harvard University, and the Human Security Commission, as well as the World Bank. Ladies and gentlemen, at this time, I invite you to turn your attention to the video screen for this presentation from Professor Sabina Alkire.
Greetings. I'm delighted to be with you on this joyful day of Jamaica's launch of their national MPI. But I also want to recognize that the reasons that the launch was delayed was due to travails in the country from the hurricane. And I want to assure you that our thoughts and prayers have been with the community since those days. What I would like to do is share with you, who are launching today an official permanent measure of multidimensional poverty in Jamaica, some of the ways in which such measures are used for policies, and really underscore to you our interest in learning how you use those measures going forward in Jamaica. I begin with Amartya Sen's observation that the motivation of measuring multidimensional poverty is the recognition that in the lives of poor people, lives are battered and diminished in different kinds of ways. And we need measures of poverty that reflect these lived situations. For example, around 80% of the 1.1 billion people who are poor in the Global Multidimensional Poverty Index experience 5 or more deprivations at the same time. So this lived reality of poverty is the motivation for the Multidimensional Poverty Index. And this is the case in many countries. For example, in El Salvador, there was an extensive consultation in poor people and their communities about what poverty means. And the indicators of that national MPI derived from people's own experiences. Look at where and how we live with holes in the roof. Roofing is important. See where we live and how, where there's no piped water. We do nothing but the same because there's a lack of leisure activities, or there's insecurity, or a lack of jobs. So multidimensional poverty measures are trying, on the one hand, to be a very good reflection of the lived reality of poverty. But on the other hand, they are meant to be tools for you, for policy actors, NGOs, civil society, private sector, academics. Sir Tony Atkinson observed, and he was an economist who worked a great deal on poverty and inequality throughout his career. And he observed that when it comes to measuring poverty, rather than other phenomena, it is very essential that the poverty metrics motivate people who are not poor to tackle poverty. And so the metrics have to be linked to policy actions, concrete and tangible, that can be undertaken to solve poverty. And he recognizes that at the end of the day, in this environment, an MPI for Jamaica is a performance indicator of how different actors are doing in reducing human deprivations and exclusion. Let me give you a brief overview of multidimensional poverty indices. In Latin America, they were around since the Coquilloc Declaration in Chile in the 1970s as the unmet basic needs indicators coming out of the census data. In Europe, there were counting-based measures used widely since René Lenoir, also in the 1970s. In 2007, the MPI methodology was developed and presented. And from 2009, beginning with Mexico, Bhutan, and Colombia, official national permanent MPIs, like that of Jamaica, have been issued by different governments and statistical offices. Complementing that as a global MPI, we continue to co-publish with the United Nations Development Programme that has the same indicators and dimensions across over 100 developing countries, whereas national MPIs carry the dimensions and indicators that matter to their national plan, to their communities, and so on. Because we wanted to support policy uses of the MPI, from 2013, we've engaged with policy leaders who want to use these metrics to create very tangible off-ramps from poverty. And this has gotten traction. So from 2017, the World Bank accepted a recommendation that World Bank would monitor global poverty using multidimensional as well as monetary metrics. The United Nations Third Decade on Poverty Eradication uses a multidimensional poverty index to track trends. The UN Secretary General's Global Sustainability Development Reports use MPI. And now it's actually over 55 countries and 4 billion people that have official national MPIs. And these are also coming into documents of the Financing for Development in Sevilla or the Second World Summit on Social Development in Doha. Alongside multidimensional poverty indices, but not covered in today's address, are newer methodologies of looking at interlinkages between indicators, looking at gender, at intra-household inequalities, at individual child poverty, at the overlap between MPI and hurricane or air pollution or drought or flood or wildfire or forest loss. So there's been a great deal of development. But what we're focused on today are official, permanent, multidimensional measures that are tailored to the Jamaican context and the definition of poverty that the people and the government and the taxpayers agree on. And Jamaica's MPI is a permanent measure that will be updated years. And also it's meant to be a tool for policy, to be used in ways
And we apologize for the abrupt end in that video. Of course, Professor Sabina Alkire, Director of OPHI, of course, she is giving us some insight into the very important policy impact of this kind of data that we'll be getting from our own national MPI. And of course, she shared with us so far that this kind of documentation has been done for many years. In fact, from the 1970s in Latin America and Europe, we've been seeing MPI policies being put in place and that kind of research being done, so they have been around for some time. She also highlighted that since 2010, there has been a global MPI that's been done by the UNDP in collaboration with OPHI and the team. And of course, this kind of policy is used for budgeting, for targeting, for policy development, or this kind of data is used for these very important tactics, coordination, monitoring, and evaluation. And we encourage each and every one of you to utilize the opportunity to peruse the documents that you have, which will be able to give you some very, very important data that will help you to ensure that in your own spaces, as you continuous development practitioners, you can take the information there and utilize it at your own leisure to help to alleviate poverty in this country. I do know that based on our program here, we have another video that's slated. I'm not sure if that one will be able to go, but if that's not the case, it would mean that we'll take the opportunity to have a lady who I know is quite excited to come along and talk to us about this very, very important Jamaica National Multidimensional Poverty Index. It has been quite some time in coming, but we know that the wait is certainly worthwhile. And of course, Suzette Johnson is going to come forward and give us an overview of the global framework within which the MPI is situated. And we're going to bring it, of course, closer to home through her, because she's going to give us an appreciation of the Jamaican MPI. And of course, you know, here in Jamaica, we do things a little differently sometimes, and our circumstances sometimes for the good or sometimes not necessarily for the good, but we have varying differences that will set us apart, and we will see that in our own MPI. So she'll share with us the local context, what it entails, and we'll also hear some detailed findings from the report. Now, the presentation, as I said, is being done by Suzette Johnson, Director of Policy Research within the Social Policy and Planning Research Division of the Planning Institute of Jamaica. And just to let you know that Suzette brings over 17 years of experience at the PIOJ and is responsible for producing socioeconomic research in important areas affecting Jamaica's development. Ladies and gentlemen, please make her welcome. And as she comes, it would be remiss of me not to share with you that her work includes, along with her team, includes the production of the very important data-filled Jamaica Survey of Living Conditions. And if you know that document, you know that it's one that's full of a lot of data that's so very important. And I know as a journalist, I used to use it almost every week to galvanize data about local development. So ladies and gentlemen, please put your hands together for her as she comes forward to give us the local context of this very important document. Come on.
Good morning, everyone, and a Happy New Year to you all. Great. Now today we are here to acknowledge an important milestone and the result of much hard work. As a country, we have developed a national multidimensional poverty index, a tool that will improve our capacity for more effective and sustained poverty reduction. The presentation will give you a brief overview of the policy context for poverty measurement, the rationale for developing an MPI for Jamaica, an outline of our journey to today, and our research findings. Could you help me with transitioning the slides, please? It's not. Thank you. Jamaica is guided by a long-term strategic development plan, Vision 2030 Jamaica, with 4 goals and 15 national outcomes, which includes the reduction of poverty and hunger. Our national goals and targets are aligned with the Sustainable Development Goals. There have been public policies aimed at reducing vulnerability to poverty from the late 1800s, and among our most recent tool is our National Policy on Poverty and the National Poverty Reduction Program. The policy and program aim to eradicate extreme poverty and to reduce the national prevalence of poverty to below 10% by the year 2030. One factor that is integral to the success of any poverty reduction program is the ability to effectively measure, monitor, and evaluate our efforts and the impact that they have. Are we targeting the right segments of the population? Are we addressing the determinants of deep, persistent poverty? Do the policies and programs adequately address the complex nature of poverty? And do the methodologies that we employ, do they adequately answer these questions for us? Jamaica traditionally uses a consumption-based measure to estimate poverty using data from the Jamaica Survey of Living Conditions, an annual household survey that has been fielded since 1988. Data from the survey are used to identify the proportion of individuals whose consumption expenditure falls below the poverty line. Disaggregation at various levels tell us where poverty is more prevalent, and region is presented on the screen just as an example. Monetary measures have helped us to track our progress in poverty reduction over the years. However, as has been said already, they do not help us to answer all the questions because we do not think of poverty only in terms of money or how we consume, but we include a wider range of factors. We want to probe the data to measure areas of deprivation more directly. So we also know, based on our studies of what happens in other countries, that for those who have developed an MPI, the population that is monetary poor is not always the same population that is multidimensionally poor. So incorporating a multidimensional measure will provide wider and a more comprehensive view of poverty in Jamaica. The MPI will add value to the prevalence indicator by providing additional dimensions for consideration. It serves to focus on the root causes of poverty. It improves our targeting. It will help with the alignment of our budgets with the efforts and interventions, and it will strengthen our capacity for monitoring and evaluating our progress towards poverty reduction. And so, we understand the benefits of expanding our scope to include a multidimensional perspective to measuring poverty. The project to develop a national MPI for Jamaica began in June 2021 with funding and technical support, as you have heard, from the Caribbean Development Bank, and we really want to express our gratitude to you. We're happy that you're here joining us in person, and also we acknowledge those that are joining us online. Technical oversight was provided for the project through a multidisciplinary project steering committee with members from relevant ministries, departments, and agencies of government, academia, civil society, the private sector, and the international development community, to ensure that the MPI is credible, effective, and sustainable as a policy tool. It included 18 organizations with a wide range of expertise that includes poverty measurement, poverty coordination, research, statistics, social and economic development, policy development, and communication. The project was implemented in 2 phases. In the first phase, a consultant was hired to conduct focus group discussions across the country to allow communities to share their perspective and experience of poverty, and to tell us the areas in which they were deprived in order to determine the relevant deprivations and dimensions that are to be captured by the index. And I'd like to pause just to acknowledge Dr. Brown and the team from the Institute for Applied Social Research who assisted us in this phase of the project. What did we get from the people? They talked about the lack of access to acceptable social services experienced particularly by vulnerable groups, persons with disabilities, children, and the elderly. They also spoke about the persistent underdevelopment and lack of infrastructure and amenities, especially in rural areas, as well as the impact of crime and violence in urban settings. They made reference to failures of the socio-political system and how that impacts their experiences, as well as the mindset that exists that prohibits a movement of households out of poverty. So the discussions went beyond asset-based, but it also included a look at the social and the psychological. The second phase of the project included the actual computation and validation of the index, and this included a cross-section of stakeholders. It relied on expert opinion and broad-based consultation. The Oxford Poverty and Human Development Initiative, OPHI, has been with us from day one, and we're happy that they're able to join us online today for our launch. The first steps in creating the MPI was selecting the dimensions and the indicators. Selection of the dimension was a normative process, and they represent the macro concepts that we'd like to measure. Within each dimension, there are indicators that represent aspects of poverty that are sensitive to change over time and that will respond to our project and policy interventions. One limitation of the methodology, however, is the fact that the data that is used to calculate the index should be available in the same data set. And each household in the sample should have no missing data. With that in mind, the Jamaica Survey of Living Conditions was selected as it is the annual survey with the largest data source available in the country on socioeconomic welfare of the household. So after multiple consultations and iterations, we now have an index that we can stand behind. The National MPI for Jamaica has 4 dimensions: education, health, living standards, and employment. Within these dimensions, there are 15 indicators. Within the education dimension, the indicators are years of schooling, school attendance, school lag, access to information communication technologies. The 3 health indicators are health access, water, and sanitation. There are 5 indicators under the living standards dimension: electricity, overcrowding, garbage collection, the material used for the outer wall of houses, cooking fuels, and the 3 employment indicators are unemployment, contribution to the National Insurance Scheme, and youth that are not employed or enrolled in school or a training facility. We then went on to defining characteristics that identified a household as being deprived, because an individual is defined as being deprived based on the characteristics of their household. So for example, in the education dimension, for the indicator years of schooling, A household is described as deprived if at least one member who is older than the age for secondary school, but younger than retirement age, that is age 19 to 64 years, if they have not completed 11 years of schooling, and we know those 11 years represent the time you would spend in primary and secondary school up to grade 11. For school attendance, if there's a member of the household within school age 3 to 18 years, who is not enrolled, or if they are enrolled but do not attend school for more than half of the time. Those are just two examples, and we went through and carefully defined each indicator and how individuals and households would be defined as being deprived. Many households at some point may be deprived in at least one of these indicators. Would you agree? You agree? Yes. But one is not enough. We are more concerned about households that are experiencing multiple deprivations. So we identified 6 of the 15 indicators that are essential and considered those the base for what we refer to as a poverty cutoff. That was equivalent to approximately 40% of the indicators. So an individual would be considered poor if they are deprived in 40% or more of the 15 indicators. We then checked that these criteria would make the index statistically robust, and at 40%, the MPI met the standards. So I'll now share with you some of the findings. But before, I'd like to share that in 2018, the 2018 JSLC was selected as the baseline due to its large size. Now, every 5 to 6 years, the JSLC is larger than usual to facilitate disaggregation at finer levels for some indicators, and so the 2018 was selected. There was no survey conducted in 2020 due to the COVID-19 pandemic, and because the pandemic was still affecting the country in 2021, an abridged survey was fielded in that year, about the same time that this project began. And so it did not include all the indicators that would be needed to calculate the MPI for that year. Also, no survey was fielded in 2022 due to the demands of the population and housing census. However, JSLC 2023 will be released in a few weeks, and subsequently we will use the data to estimate the 2023 MPI. Therefore, the presentation for today will include data only for 2018 and 2019 to give you some insight into what the MPI can do. We first looked at the proportion of individuals that experience deprivation in each indicator. The 2 largest proportions were for persons who did not contribute to the NIS and those who did not have proper garbage disposal. In the baseline year, 2018, that was 62% for the NIS and 32% without proper garbage disposal. We then asked what proportion of the population were multidimensionally poor, or in other words, were deprived in 40% or more of the weighted indicators. In 2018, approximately 11.6% of the population was multidimensionally poor. On average, they were deprived in 49.2% of the indicators. That is their level of intensity. This resulted in an MPI of 0.057. In 2019, there was an overall decline in the index to 0.043, resulting mainly from a decline in the proportion of individuals who were multidimensionally poor at 8.7%. The intensity of the poor was relatively unchanged at 49.3%. It is also important to look at the level of deprivation that the poor is experiencing. In 2018, 37.1% experienced 40 to 45% of deprivation. They experienced deprivation in 40 to 45% of the indicators. 24.3% experienced deprivations in 45 to under 50% of the indicators, which totals approximately 61.4% of those who experienced a little under a half of all indicators. In 2019, this proportion increased slightly to 64.2%, indicating an increase in the proportion of individuals that were deprived in less than half of the weighted indicators between those 2 years. We did not identify anyone who was deprived in more than 70% of the indicators. The MPI methodology allows us to identify what deprivations have the greatest effect on multidimensional poverty and how it can be reduced. We identify the proportion of the population that was both multidimensionally poor and deprived in each indicator. In 2018, contribution to NIS had the largest ratio. 10.3% of the population lived in a household that was both multidimensionally poor and no member aged 18 years or older contributed to the scheme. The indicator with the second highest ratio was garbage collection. 8% of the population were both multidimensionally poor and lived in a household that disposed of their garbage by burning, throwing it in an unsuitable place such as a ditch or the river. Unimproved sanitation at 7.2% and unemployment, 6.9%, were the third and fourth highest deprivations among the poor in 2018. When we look at the overall contribution of each indicator to multidimensional poverty, it helps to identify what interventions would have the greatest impact on reducing MPI poverty rate. Of the 15 indicators, the largest contributors to the national multidimensional poverty was contribution to the NIS, followed by sanitation and unemployment. In 2019, the contribution to the NIS and sanitation remained the main contributors, but unemployment was surpassed by water. We looked at multidimensional poverty in different subgroups of the population. By geographical region, rural areas had the highest incidence of multidimensional poverty at 18.1% in 2018. By comparison, other urban centers and the greater Kingston metropolitan area had a lower incidence at 9.5 and 2.9 respectively. Multidimensional poverty was disproportionately higher in rural areas, as that region accounts for 46.6% of the population. However, 71% of the country's multidimensionally poor persons live in rural areas. Other disaggregation showed a higher incidence of MPI poverty in female-headed households than in male-headed households, and among children aged 0 to 14 years than among older persons. Multidimensional poverty was also higher in households with at least one child present than those without children and in large-sized households. Of the subgroups that were mentioned, in 2019, we saw declines in households headed by females, persons of working age, those without children, and households with 2 to 3 individuals. Regarding disabilities, we also compared households with at least one member with a disability with those households that did not. In 2018, we saw no difference, but in 2019, the incidence of MPI poverty was higher among individuals living in a household with at least one member that had a disability. Generally, the indicators that had the largest impact on MPI poverty were in the employment dimension. However, exceptions were observed when we looked at the elderly population and persons who lived alone, for whom health and living standards had a greater weight. A significant advantage of using the same data source for estimating both the monetary poverty and multidimensional poverty rates is the ability to identify those who may be excluded depending on the methodology that is used. A comparison of both measures showed that in 2018, an estimated 12.6% of the population was monetary poor, while 11.6% was multidimensionally poor, with an overlap of 4.3%. This means that 19.9% of the population was classified as either monetary poor only, MPI poor only, or both monetary and MPI poor, while 80.1% was found to be non-poor. In 2019, the proportion of the population that was considered poor was 15.7%, 7% monetary poor only, 5.1% MPI poor only, and 3.6% both monetary and MPI poor. 84.3% were non-poor. The estimates for 2018 and 2019 using the monetary measure was statistically similar. However, this combined approach showed an overall decline in the proportion of the poor by approximately 4.2 percentage points. In addition, using 2018 as an example, we see that the 7.3% of the population experiencing multidimensional poverty, but not captured by the monetary measure, highlights the added value of a national MPI as a complementary measure to monetary poverty. It helps to ensure that individuals who spend above the monetary line, but who experience other deprivations captured by the MPI are not left behind. The MPI provides a more inclusive perspective on the dynamic nature of poverty in Jamaica and adds valuable information for public policy and program interventions. Using both measures gives the added benefit of being able to identify a wider segment of vulnerabilities that goes beyond money, and identifies areas for targeted interventions. The MPI informs the design and the targeting of social policies by identifying the key deprivations experienced by poor individuals and households. It also facilitates targeting for social protection programs and guides program intervention. The largest contributors to the national MPI poverty were the lack of paying to the NIS that provides a minimum guarantee against income loss, inadequate sanitation, unemployment, and inadequate access to clean drinking water. Priority action is needed to address issues of income security, insurance, basic infrastructure, and building resilience to address the major determinants of poverty. The initiatives should target the reduction of multidimensional poverty as well as improvement in well-being, particularly implementing accelerated interventions in sectors, regions, and population subgroups that face the most significant challenges. Rural areas have the highest incidence of both multidimensional poverty and monetary poverty. Hence, there is pressing need for targeted policies and programs, especially in the areas of access to safe drinking water, proper sanitation, garbage disposal, provisions for income security, and completing secondary level education. Additional research is needed in the areas of culture, socialization, aspirations around well-being, and other qualitative factors that give further insight into the perspectives on this complex issue called poverty and multidimensional poverty in Jamaica. I would like to encourage you all to spend some time reading the report that we have provided. It has a lot of details. We have also provided summary information that can be found on the PIOJ website. Thank you.
Thank you so very much, Suzette, for that very insightful presentation, ladies and gentlemen. Another round of applause for her. And quite intriguing, I'd say, the findings of the MPI. And I really found just how you were able to break down for us the reality that there are some Jamaicans who may be monetary poor, MPI poor, or both. And the ability to now take this intersection and the new data that we'll be able to have that is more granular than it was before to be able to help us to decide on how do we treat with alleviating poverty in this country is going to be also very important. And the conclusions, the largest contributors to national poverty were the lack of ensuring the minimum guarantee against income loss and inadequate sanitation, as well as unemployment and inadequate access to clean drinking water. Very eye-opening findings there, and the need for priority focus to be placed on rural areas, access to safe drinking water, proper sanitation, garbage collection, provisions for income security, and completing secondary level education. And also some gaps were identified, the need for some more look at culture and other kinds of qualitative data that could add some more value to how we look at poverty in this country. Now, we know you'll have a few questions, and we're going to get to that in a moment. But before we do so, we ask you to turn your attention to the video screens as we will pick up on an explainer video to help us realize just how important this measure is and really to give us some more insights into exactly how it works. And then we'll also continue the video with Professor Sabina Alkire from OPHI. And after that, we will introduce our other speaker and invite you to ask your questions. So we're asking you to make notes. Any questions you may have, we will have a microphone that will allow you to be able to ask those questions. But before that, we will pick up on those two video presentations. Turn your attention to the video screens, ladies and gentlemen.
Jamaica is transforming how we understand and address poverty. Traditionally, if an individual cannot afford basic goods and services or spend at or above the poverty line, that person is counted as living in poverty. The poverty line is established by the government and updated every year.
Multidimensional poverty considers poverty to be an experience of overlapping.
like to Portia with our special guest.
A person is considered multidimensionally poor if he or she experiences multiple disadvantages in a critical share of indicators at the same time.
The Multidimensional Poverty Index is a tool that captures the details about the experience of people living in poverty. The index shows the proportion of the population that are poor, the intensity of their poverty, and which areas and groups are poorest. Jamaica is one of about 50 countries that use the MPI.
The Jamaica National MPI is made up of 15 indicators grouped into 4 dimensions: education, health, living standards, and employment. Each dimension is equally weighted, and each indicator within each dimension is also equally weighted. The National MPI identifies a person as multidimensionally poor if he or she is deprived in 40% or more of the indicators included in the measure. The Jamaica National MPI is calculated using data from the Jamaica Survey of Living Conditions, JSLC.
The National MPI was developed based on extensive consultations conducted in 2 phases. In Phase 1, there were island-wide focus group discussions with 357 participants from 17 communities across 7 parishes. The second phase included technical consultations and empirical research to design, compute, and validate the measure.
The National MPI will complement rather than replace the existing monetary poverty measure. The MPI shows which deprivations they face and in what combinations, allowing government to identify who is poor and in what ways.
The Jamaica National MPI will be an official permanent policy tool to strengthen the country's poverty reduction strategy, offer a stable measure against shocks, inform the design and the targeting of social policies by identifying the key deprivations experienced by poor individuals and households, facilitate targeting for social protection programs and guide program implementation, facilitate leaving no one behind.
The MPI will be released whenever the indicators are available in the Jamaica Survey of Living Conditions for a given year. For further information, visit the PIOJ website at www.pioj.gov.jm.
So, ladies and gentlemen, you have even more information on the importance of this tool and how we localize this MPI tool to ensure that we have a better understanding of poverty here in Jamaica. And as was shared, this tool has 4 dimensions: education, health, living standards, and employment, with sharp focus on 15 various indicators that are being tracked. And of course, we will define someone as MPI poor if 40% or more of those indicators are considered deprived for these individuals. So we look forward to even more information. And of course, each of you in this room has a copy of the latest document, and I know you have already been making notes. And as I said to you earlier, in short order, we will be taking some questions from the audience. But before that, we are going to, in fact, go back to an earlier presentation, and Professor Alkire is, in fact, joining us live on Zoom. So, Professor Alkire, are you able to hear me?
Yes, I am.
Brilliant. A very good morning to you. Well, it is, I think, afternoon for you now. So, thank you so very much for joining us, and we appreciate you being here. Ladies and gentlemen, please put your hands together for her.
Thank you so much.
And next time we hope to have you right here in Kingston, Jamaica with us. But Professor Alkire, over to you to finish up your presentation.
Thank you so much. And it's a delight to be with you. I wish I could be there in person, but really we are inspired at OPHI by the quality of the Jamaica MPI, by the tenacity, and we are also aware of the very difficult times that have been had in the last few months, and you've been much in our thoughts. But we are delighted that the moment has come for its launch. I will share some of the slides and spend no more than max 20 minutes just going through some of the rest of the policy uses that countries have had when they use their MPI. So I think, as others have already shared, multidimensional poverty looks at the overlap between different deprivations that poor people experience. And it does so in a way that tries to meld together the lived experience of poverty, the priorities and national plans of the policy actors, the experts, and the workers with those communities, and also the taxpayers and the people who want to have a just and a fair society. And I think we've talked about measurement, that the MPI links to sustainable development goals, that it is used widely for policy, and in particular that it looks at people, as our chair said, who are deprived in a critical mass of indicators at the same time. So I will skip that and start with the uses of national MPIs for policy. I'd like to commend Jamaica in being the newest country to launch an official permanent measure of multidimensional poverty. And I know many countries are interested in this launch and looking forward to going further into your work. The policy uses of MPI are driven by governments, and OPHI have the privilege, as the Secretariat of a South-South network, to learn from many actors and to try to report to you some of the ways in which they use MPI as a tool to reduce poverty. So, for example, in Colombia during 8 years, multidimensional and monetary poverty were both cut by 1/3. But when the then president, Juan Manuel Santos, came to write up the experience of poverty of Colombia in using the MPI for poverty reduction, he recognized that the fight against poverty is not just a technical issue, but one of leadership. And that's why I'm so grateful for this event and for each of you, because you have the ability, working together and with your positions of responsibility, to move the needle in very concrete and visible ways that make a difference in people's lives. So the 7 main uses of the MPI, first is to complement monetary poverty. Both the media, which will report on the Jamaica launch, and other governments regularly report without problem that there are now 2 official measures, one of monetary poverty and one of multidimensional poverty. And when we use them together, we actually see poverty from different angles, which means sometimes we see different people. The United States, for example, has a multidimensional deprivation index, which is what they call their MPI. And they observed that 6.8% of their population were MPI poor, but not monetary poor. And they studied it in the US Census Bureau and observed that there was a value added, because these people had deprivations that were invisible when we only looked at monetary poverty. In a similar way, Michelle Bachelet, as president of Chile, when she launched her MPI, said, "This enables me to see what people are experiencing, but which we have not recognized." And so they may feel overlooked, and the MPI can make visible. And so a shorthand of that is to say, if we only have one poverty measure, we don't see it in all its forms. And so having the monetary and the multidimensional working together is a more accurate framework for poverty measurement and reduction. The second is obviously to track trends over time. And we wanted to underscore that many countries do have strong trends in reducing MPI significantly in relatively short periods. So this is not a measure which is static, but one which political effort can reduce quickly and within periods as short as 2 to 3 years at a statistically significant level. And it also makes visible policies that perhaps are not made to impact monetary poverty. The United States had an acceleration of poverty reduction in 2013 to 15, and monetary poverty did not have that same acceleration. And this was due to the rollout in that context of a healthcare program. And other countries similarly see an investment in child education, in housing, having an immediate effect on multidimensional poverty, but a lagged or weaker effect on monetary poverty. The third use is for budget allocation, and I'll spend a little bit more time on this. Every country has a different way of allocating budget, and MPI is only one of the priorities among others. But it is a priority where clear allocation can have a big impact. In the case of Colombia, they count the number of people or households who are deprived in each indicator. And they also map those against the ministries and the programs and interventions that are targeting those particular indicators. Sometimes they find duplication, which can then be cut to make budget available for other priorities. In the case of Colombia, they use unit costs, and they look at the unit cost of reducing each deprivation, and they look at the number of people or households that would require that investment in order to solve their deprivations. And so they can get a total cost per indicator. But often that cost is too high. So then, breaking silos, looking across ministries for cost savings, they look at multi-sectoral policies that can have a lower budget imprint because there's coordination in transport, because one social worker looks after multiple programs and connects the same household with one visit to that household to 5 or 7 programs. And so this makes it a lot easier to register poor and deprived people in programs for which they are eligible, but perhaps not yet registered, and it does cut costs. Another example is the case of Costa Rica, which had a very strong social expenditure that had increased greatly in nearly 30 years. But during that time, although health and education spending increased 5-fold or more, monetary poverty did not decline. And so the National Development Plan was implemented by the Vice President, and they recognized that their newly launched MPI could be an official measure that could be useful for budget allocation. They found that the existing allocation did not cover all of the indicators of their national MPI, but they also found duplication that they could cut. And then they simulated different ways of spending money and how that would reduce indicators of the MPI and therefore reduce the MPI so that people left poverty and the poorest made the fastest progress. And recognizing this value, there was a cabinet meeting and later a presidential directive that required the MPI of Costa Rica to be used for budgetary planning. And the officials and mid-level officials in the social sector had to use it as an official measure for allocating resources. This was during a time of fiscal austerity when, as I mentioned, they also had to release funds to address new deprivations that were not addressed in the previous budget. And yet this combination of evidence, a clear focus on the MPI, led in 2015 to a reallocation of resources, which meant with a fixed budget, MPI reduction accelerated. And as you can see, that acceleration in 2015 continued. And so while 26% of people in Costa Rica were poor in 2010, it had fallen to 12% in 2023. So that might be an interesting policy. Every country is different. Jamaica will have your own expertise, your own structures. But this has, in some contexts, been a useful use of the MPI. Another useful policy application has been targeting. And this can either be targeting groups, regions, households with somebody experiencing disability by age groups, the children, the elderly, or indigenous populations. Or it can be household targeting using CIOBEN, National Social Registry, and other similar Cadastro Único databases at the household level. So for example, at the household level during the COVID pandemic with Monica Pinella, who has been supporting Jamaica, the government created a bespoke vulnerability measure with 15 indicators, and it used it to identify people and then to issue the kind of responses they required, whether that was medical care, whether it was food security, whether it was biosafety equipment. Another example is Pakistan, where the MPI went to the district level And so when they had a national emergency with the flooding in Sindh, they could use their existing MPI database to target households for emergency response. In Panama, there was a recognition broadly that although indigenous communities were not greatly poorer in monetary sense, they were still being left behind. And when Panama launched its MPI, this was very visible. As you see in Los Santos, 4.1% of people were poor, whereas in indigenous areas, it was 78 to 93%. But by targeting those regions, there was a very strong reduction, leaving the poorest not behind, but making the fastest progress for them. And at the same time, Los Santos, Panama City, and less poor regions also had strong reductions. So it does not mean neglecting the urban areas and priority areas, but it's still possible to have very fast progress in the poorest areas. And I could give other examples. I'll move on. When we talk about targeting, we mustn't forget that regions vary, and that therefore the composition of poverty by indicator in the 4 dimensions of Jamaica's MPI will also vary in the north and the south, in different regions and groups. And so when there is targeting, one also has to look at particular deprivation profiles so that the response is most cost-effective and high impact. In terms of large-scale household targeting, there are a number in Latin America. I will also give an example of Vietnam, where they had a very large poverty census and annual updates to that census, and they used it to target the monetary poor and the multidimensionally poor, and then to give the exact deprivations the households needed. In the case of Vietnam, this included free healthcare, exemption of tuition fees in secondary schooling, credit priority for housing, cash transfers for electricity, improvement of the household infrastructure, the durable housing, the services, and so on. So there are a number of examples of this that are gaining ground in many different regions. Finally, we look at coordination across ministries, across levels of government. And we recognize that this is difficult, that often there's a lot of fragmentation, and there's also histories of how different institutions have worked. And yet it can be possible to use the MPI as a management tool that helps to have a more joined up policies when it comes to poverty. Our colleague Gonzalo Hernandez Licona, who was in charge of the first MPI measured by Conoval in Mexico, describes an ideal set of social policies as a bowling strike, where with one policy you hit a number of deprivations people are experiencing. In the case of Colombia, coming back to that example, with McKinsey, they used the 15 indicators of their MPI, which have the same 4 dimensions as Jamaica, plus a childhood and youth dimension, as the KPIs for their poverty reduction in multidimensional terms. And they set annual targets based on microsimulations. And they also kept some unallocated funding. So if an indicator was red, it wasn't meeting its annual target, it created an alert. And there was a presidential roundtable in which multiple ministers came together then to figure out what public policy could unblock that bottleneck that year. And so this meant that there was a catalytic investment each year and clear management, results-based management to achieve the outcomes that I mentioned. It also meant that ministers learned from each other, that they needed each other to make progress on these different areas of policy. And it meant that they could also see very concretely their changes and their impacts of their work individually and together.
Sabina, you are mute.
Okay. The last point is just what I've been stressing all along, is that the poorest groups need to make the fastest progress. And the MPI enables us to celebrate situations in which, for example, the poorest states in India had the very fastest progress, in which children or indigenous groups had the very fastest progress. And I think this also changes the dynamics around poverty from something that people feel cannot be changed to something that they recognize can be changed, where they can get recognition. And for those of you in government, it's our hope that you will work on poverty, obviously because of its ethical importance, but also that it would be good in terms of recognition. So I'm delighted at this launch event that this Jamaica's MPI is being communicated, because many hands make light work, and sharing the MPI with NGOs who can use it at their level, at the private sector, which played a lead role in Costa Rica and other governments in sharing their work to reduce national MPI. In academia, please don't forget your professors and your students who can add a great deal, and different parts of government from local to national. And so this ongoing task of sharing information so that different levels of government are confident in interpreting their MPI and in acting to reduce it, and that they get recognition when there is success. This seems to be what this launch event is about, and where we hope the ripples of the teams that have created Jamaica's MPI will continue. So I'd like to really end there, recognizing that the fight against poverty is not just a technical issue, although we celebrate Jamaica Statistics Office for their fantastic and credible work and leadership, but it also will require the leadership of others in this room. And we look forward as OPHI to learning how Jamaica uses their MPI, and so that you can also share it with others in our network, which have different and yet similar and overlapping challenges and want to learn from you. So thank you all so very much.
Ladies and gentlemen, please put your hands together for Professor Sabina Alkire, especially because she took the opportunity to join us live online after some minor technical challenges there, but nonetheless, we're so happy and grateful that you were able to join us for this presentation and to complete sharing some global context for us in this, our historic launch of our own MPI. And of course, you're going to stay with us, I understand, Professor Alkire, as I also re-invite Ms. Johnson to join us on stage. And as she comes, let me also introduce to you Dr. Monica Pinella Roncancio, who will be joining us online as well. And she is from the Oxford University. And Dr. Pinella Roncancio is a trained physiotherapist with a master's in economics from Universidad del Rosario and a master's in health economics, policy and law from Erasmus University in Rotterdam, Netherlands. She finished her PhD in social policy at the University of Birmingham in the UK. Ladies and gentlemen, at this time, it is your opportunity to field your questions. So I heard somebody giving an applause. Yes, you can give her a round of applause to welcome her online. And as I know many of you have questions, we do have a microphone that is set up towards the back of the well. We're going to be roving with this microphone now instead. So we have a roving microphone. So we know you have a few questions, and we'll take the opportunity now for you to field those questions. So I'm going to ask you all, ladies and gentlemen, by the show of hands, just simply raise your hands, and we will come to you with the microphone. And we have one question. We're going to ask you to just kindly identify yourself and the organization you're representing, and then go ahead with your question.
Hi, everyone. I'm Kimberly. I'm from the Cabinet Office. And I just wanted to say congrats on the launch of this. I think it's quite important. My question is around the other areas of interest, for example, culture, and what are the thoughts around that, and specifically what aspects of culture. And equally, I'm curious about exploring other aspects as well, for example, climate vulnerabilities and technological advancement, and how those might impact our analysis of poverty. And just to say, I recognize that emphasis on social policy, and I think rightly so, but I also think we could have further exploration essentially on the relevance to economic policy and how that could also be impactful. So I would just like to hear thoughts around those.
All right, so thoughts on inclusion of culture, which was one of the areas that was highlighted as need for more research in that area. But let me say, Suzette, would you like to take that one? All right, Suzette, I'm going to invite you to, and while Suzette prepares her response, I know also Professor Alkire, perhaps you could also maybe give some global context as well as it relates to maybe culture and its considerations in the MPI as a post after your response, Suzette. So Suzette will go first.
Thank you so much. We are recommending that we explore some of these areas that were shared with us by the people on the ground, the people with whom we spoke, trying to get an understanding of what their understanding is, what their experience is. And we realize that not everything is available for direct measurement through a household survey, and that there are those limitations. But we cannot ignore the cultural factors that are contributing to the perpetuation of intergenerational poverty. We need to look at factors within the Jamaican context that might be influencing how household members behave based on their particular circumstances. So that's why we are suggesting it. We do not want to leave what the persons have told us behind or unaddressed. We're saying we need to pay more attention to those particular concerns.
Indeed. Professor Alkire?
Yes, thanks. It's a wonderful question. Culture is so important in many different ways, and different MPIs have different entrances. For example, leisure activities, football fields, recreational facilities, playgrounds, that's one. And in terms of environment, some MPIs do have things like living near a place that floods or other environmental difficulties in their MPI. And in terms of technology, access to internet, having different devices can be part of it. However, I would also observe that culture can go both ways. In the case of Bhutan, there is an MPI and there is also a well-being measure. And the well-being measure has culture and environment and community participation and psychological well-being in it. And we find that some areas are poor in well-being and also poor. But one of the poorest areas had the highest well-being. And when you looked into it, they had very strong culture of dance, of song. They had very strong community bonds and very strong harmony with nature. And so I think bringing in the positive and the negative, whether it's in the same measure or in a linked well-being measure, can be very useful, both for appreciating strong cultures that might be materially poor but have so much to teach the rest of us, as well as recognizing, as Suzette said, the cultures that can perpetuate or create dependency. So I think it's a very ripe area for further work.
Certainly sharing the importance of those factors. And of course, as the conversations evolve and the metrics become even more seasoned and more considerations are made, I know that consideration will be made for those areas as the research continues. Do we have any other questions in the room? Of course, reminding you to kindly identify yourself, the organization you're representing, and then go ahead with your question.
Hi, good morning, everyone. I'm Hugh Bowman with the National Library of Jamaica. So I'm impressed about this publication and the content. I spent a lot of time reading right here, and I was inspired by the amount of data that has been collected to reach this publication. All right, so for the MPI, I noted, well, what I found surprising, naturally in Jamaica, we hear that St. Thomas and Hanover are among the poorer parishes in Jamaica. And I was surprised when it wasn't among the 7 parishes that respondents were a part of. What I want to find, though, is we know the concept that garbage in, garbage out. So we are dependent on the quality of the information and our data that comes from the respondents in these surveys. How did the process guarantee that the accuracy of that information? And I give an example. Someone says the garbage disposal, they dispose it in we call it gullies. You use a nicer word. So somebody living on the gullies, along the gully side, and they dispose their garbage every weekend in the gullies. But when you come to them, they're telling you that's what they do, when in fact there is a process, or there's garbage trucks that do come for them, so it becomes more of a preference, and then it's indicated now in your report that they don't have access to good garbage disposal, when it really in fact is a choice of theirs to dump in the gully. Similar with ICT and access, some persons may just choose not to, or to invest in that because they have access at work and Wi-Fi from the neighbors and all of that. So those are real factors, but they are captured in your assessment as deprivation factors.
Right, so your question is
yes,
with regards to data integrity and how do we assure that essentially. So could you, Suzette, go ahead and share with him?
Okay, I'm trying to clarify the first part of the question about the parishes that were selected.
So I think he
initially.
used that as an example to say,
Okay.
based on what he saw, they were apparently excluded from the, right. So but essentially his question is looking at data integrity and how do we ensure that the data is collected is reflexive of what is the reality in the society, essentially.
Sure, thank you.
Have I captured the essence of your question correctly? Yes.
Yes, so we are looking at access. And I think it's important to keep in mind, and using your example of garbage disposal, that if it is that we believe as service providers that something is available to a particular community, but they're not using it for a particular reason, I think that in and of itself is an indication that there is a gap. There's a gap in the service or how it's communicated or how we interact with the community. And so it gives direction. If you see that a particular indicator is moving upwards, and that's not what we'd like, we are saying, see it as an indication to explore the issue a little more. We need to interrogate the issue and see how it is that we can improve the connection between the household and the service provider. Yes? And we do ensure that our surveys or questionnaires are properly tested, that they meet all the international standards for data collection, data analysis, and reporting. So all those standards have been checked and met.
And if I may bring in Dr. Pinella Roncancio, perhaps you could give us some of the global perspectives as it relates to data integrity and that kind of assurance in MPIs. As I also see another one of our colleagues who has a question, so I'm going to invite us to take that microphone to her in the mean. Oh, we have a question here and then her. So hold on your question before as I ask Dr. Roncancio to respond.
Thank you very much, and congratulations, everyone. So there is one thing that is important, like we need to acknowledge that there is people who might, as Suzette was saying, might the service be there but not use it, and how we as a service providers make sure that people are using the service. So ideally, if you have a rubbish disposal that it will manage the rubbish in the correct way, you will push it, let's say like that, or will incentivize households to use the rubbish disposal and not throw the rubbish in the streets. So that's part of the education and how we communicate how the service work and how households use those services. There is another thing in the multidimensional poverty index. So let's say a household who have like rubbish disposal, but they say, I throw the rubbish in the river or something like that. So that household, if they are only deprived in rubbish disposal, they will be deprived in that indicator, but they will not be multidimensionally poor. So one of the advantages of the MPI or the Alkire Foster method is that you can analyze indicators, but the most important is the joint distribution. So people who are deprived in rubbish disposal, but also are deprived in access to education, electricity, access to water, sanitation, employment, and so on, are the people who are going to be identified as multidimensionally poor, and are the ones who we are going to focus, because those are the ones who are multidimensionally poor. Those who are only deprived in rubbish disposal, we will need to identify why they are not using the services in the case that we know that in that town or that parish there is services, but also to implement different strategies. But they are not the focus on of the multidimensional poverty measure, because they are not poor. They are deprived in that indicator, but that doesn't mean that they are not they are poor. And the same happened with access to internet. That was the other example. So if we have a person that say, I don't want to have access to internet in my household because I have access to internet in my school or in the university or in my work, and I don't want to have access in the household, that person will be deprived in that indicator, but probably not multidimensionally poor if there is not other deprivation. So that's a key, really important aspect. In here, and for those who work in the statistics office, you're the experts on this, but we collect data and we try to validate as much as the data and reduce the measurement error.
Right.
And because of that, the questions always try to capture, like, do you have access to rubbish disposal, or how do you dispose the rubbish? So, yeah, so, I close that, sorry.
Thank you so very much. So essentially, we try to make the collection as representative as possible of the population, so we ensure as best as possible what's collected is reflexive of the reality in the country itself. I also would like to go to our next question.
Hi, good morning, everyone. My name is Alvin Harris. I'm a senior economist at the Bank of Jamaica. So first I want to say congratulations on this launch. I see a lot of work has been put in, and I'm really proud to be here and see this work. I just have a quick question, however. So we have 4 different dimensions, and I see that each of them seem to be having equal weighting, which is 25%, right? For me personally, sometimes Jamaica appears as a paradoxical society where you see some people appear to be rich, but you hear people on the other side. It seems like it's on the extreme side. People are either really rich or people are either really poor. But across these different dimensions, some people may be doing a bit better than the other dimensions. So I'm trying to get an understanding of why we have equal weighting for each category, if I understand it correctly, if that's the case.
A decision was taken for equal weighting for each dimension and equal weighting for each indicator within each dimension because it reflects international best practice, as well as the challenge we have in determining which one is more important. What criteria would be used to determine which is more important and to what degree? That is a challenge that is innate in the process, and we have observed that for most of the MPIs that exist globally, the dimensions and indicators are equally weighted. That is, yeah.
All right. I was hoping, though, that maybe from the initial phase 1 survey, maybe, I don't know if you could get some insight from that. Was it possible?
You're referring to the focus group discussions?
Yeah, I don't know.
As you can well imagine, that different groups, depending on who we spoke with, would have had a greater focus on a particular issue, but we needed to be balanced because we needed to be representing what exists across the island. Yes, so, yeah.
All right, thank you so very much. We had a hand up on this side.
Hold on, let me ask one question before.
Sure.
Cutting in.
And I'll say that's our penultimate question in this segment, ladies and gentlemen, because we'll then move to our panel discussion, after which you'll be allowed to ask other questions as well. So we'll take your question, then yours, and then to the panel discussion.
Just wanted to know if there was any consideration in including assets owned based on the living survey that was done. That's all on the basis of it can either inflate or deflate the index itself.
And that's such an interesting question because we focus on what was dominant from the consultations that we did, and assets, an asset base was not a dominant feature. It was more about the infrastructure, the services, the particular condition that the person is in at the time. The focus on asset was not as strong.
Thank you so very much. Our next question. I'm not sure if we're hearing you.
Hello?
There we go.
Hi, good morning, everyone. I'm Karlene Temple-Anderson from the Ministry of Health and Wellness. I just have one question. Excellent job. we're definitely going in the right direction. Can you please provide a definition for female-headed and male-headed?
When the interviewer goes to the household, we ask the respondent to identify the individual who is considered to be the head of their household. There's also consideration given to age and to who the principal owner is. And then those responses are then classifies the household as whether female-headed or male-headed when it gets to the analysis stage.
All right. Thank you so very much. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm going to ask you to put your hands together for our speakers. Suzette Johnson, who has been certainly instrumental in our local MP, and we thank as well Professor Sabina Alkire from OPHI, as well as her colleague, Dr. Monica Pinella Roncancio. Put your hands together for them once again, ladies and gentlemen, and we thank you so very much for joining us. So, of course, we move to the very important part of this morning's proceedings. Of course, all of what we are doing this morning is so important, but we must have a formal declaration of the National Multidimensional Poverty Index, MPI, as it's being officially launched. And of course, the launch coincides with the presentation of the MPI report, which was done, and we will be presenting the official document to our partners. So to make this declaration, ladies and gentlemen, please join me in welcoming to the stage once again Dr. Wayne Henry, Director General of the Planning Institute of Jamaica, who will officially launch the Jamaica National MPI and present the report. Please put your hands together for him as he comes.
So let me thank, again, our moderator doing such a tremendous job. Let me thank all the partners who've partnered with us in this process. As you've heard, quite a lot of work that's gone in and very valuable partnerships locally and internationally. I want to thank you all for being here for this very important launch. The questions were very good. It was very rich questions. We were sitting, we were saying they are good questions. Issues on the equal weighting, and so you can imagine, as Suzette explained, that the subjectivity around what would take precedent in terms of which criteria or criterion would be most important, or which set of criteria. And so treating them equally is in keeping with, as you're hearing, international best practice. But certainly, we are very pleased that this morning we are able to launch the Jamaica National Multidimensional Poverty Index. And I declare the index hereby launched. I am to hand it over to someone. Oh.
So Dr. Henry will remain with us on stage as I invite our key partners. And ladies and gentlemen, I need a bigger round of applause for that historic moment. You are witnessing a moment in history. You can tell your grandchildren that you are here for the very, very first local MPI. So it is a big deal. So I'm going to invite first up Dr. Stephen Kerr from the Ministry of Education, Skills, Youth and Information to come forward to collect your copy of the MPI document. And as been shared throughout this morning's proceedings, it's a reminder to you that the findings here are not just to be held in this document, but we encourage you to utilize it in your own communities and organizations, in your respective ministries, departments, and agencies. You are going to now have to take this data from this document to see how you can help to leave no one behind. Let me invite as well Ms. Portia Magnus. And so you're going to stay with us. So I'm going to ask you to remain with us because we will have a lovely photo opportunity. And I want to thank my friends and colleagues from the media who are here, who will help to spread this message as you put your hands together for Ms. Portia Magnus from the Ministry of Labor and Social Security, a critical ministry which is already looking at how to eradicate poverty in this country in so many ways. We know that they have responsibility for various social security programs in this country, and I know this data will be very, very important to the work that they do. As I also invite Mrs. Karlene Temple-Anderson from the Ministry of Health and Wellness. Of course, you heard her earlier sharing her question, and we invite her to come along. Of course, the team from the Ministry of Health and Wellness, I see a number of familiar faces in the audience, and I know that they will be utilizing this data as well to ensure that we leave no one behind, and how, of course, there is health impact, as you saw, as one of the pillars in this data set, and how they can use that to help to ensure that the health needs of our MPI, persons considered MPI poor, are catered for. Mr. Elbert Ellis from the CDB, we welcome you on stage as well. Of course, you are one of our key partners, so you must have a physical copy to take back with you to Barbados, sir. And we thank you again for the kind partnership and support. We thank you so very much for the financial support as well, and the technical support that was provided to ensure that we were able to get to this place. The journey started in 2021, and we are here today. And of course, Hurricane Melissa could not stop this show. So we are so happy to be here this morning. Ms. Keisha Myers from the National Library Service of Jamaica. And I'm inviting you, ladies and gentlemen, to just make your way to that side of the stage, please. So we still need you on stage, but we're inviting you to be on that side of the stage as I invite Dr. Henry to come over just a little bit more for ease of reference for photographers. So Keisha Myers from the National Library of Jamaica. Of course, the National Library Service plays a critical role in ensuring that we keep a repository of all types of information in this country. And we thank them so very much for their partnership, and we look forward to them continuing to also house this document in their repositories, so across the length and breadth of this country, people will have access. Dr. Arlene Bailey, who will be representing academia, put your hands together for her, please, as she comes. A very important part of the picture as well. Of course, academia is going to be looking at this data and probably even delving further into the kinds of research that we need to give us even greater perspective. And we thank all members of academia who have been involved in this process and supporting the research work that's being done, and we look forward for greater partnerships to come. And of course, let me invite Mr. Easton Williams, Mrs. Suzette Johnson, and Mrs. Shelley-Ann Edwards from the PIOJ. And I know Suzette did not expect that, but we're inviting you all up. So Mr. Easton Williams, I see him coming, and Mrs. Shelley-Ann Edwards, make your way. These persons, ladies and gentlemen, are part of the team who have ensured that we're able to have this document here today. And I know it's a robust team, but I know that they are seeing the fruit of their labor now and literally seeing the years of work coming together in this document. Another round of applause for them, please, ladies and gentlemen. And of course, if we don't have photos, it didn't happen according to this day and age. So of course, we're ensuring that we have the photo opportunities from all our stakeholders. And of course, you in the audience, I want you to give yourselves a round of applause as well for the work that you are about to do to help to reduce poverty in this country, because you are going to be bastions of ensuring that this message gets out to everyone across the length and breadth of Jamaica, and how we can utilize this data to leave no one behind. Of course, we are advancing the global goals, the SDGs. Of course, this falls squarely under Goal 1, no poverty. And of course, we know that it helps to advance our own national development agenda. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you so very much. Keep that applause going for them. Now, of course, there is no event in this country without a cultural experience. And while we prepare for that, I do want to draw your attention to the QR code that is located on your program. So if you have a program in hand now, we're inviting you to take a look at that program closely, because there is a QR code, and that will connect you with the MPI page on the PIOJ's website. And of course, this will have the video you saw earlier, a digital copy of the report for download, and other resources that will be useful as you help to spread the word and the message of this launch. Now, the National Multidimensional Poverty Index is now officially launched, as was done by Dr. Henry, and the report is available on the PIOJ website. And of course, as a community, it must be all hands on deck to use the MPI information to reduce poverty in all dimensions. Now, of course, we must join together in our respective areas to ensure that this information reaches those who can make a difference in our country. And we thank you so very much for being here as a part of this historic launch. So, ladies and gentlemen, we have the pleasure of experiencing what I know will be an exceptional performance. This piece, entitled Wilderness, will be performed by Dr. Amina Blackwood Meeks, who is a celebrated Jamaican writer, actress, and storyteller whose work has captivated audiences locally and internationally. Dr. Amina Blackwood Meeks holds a PhD in Cultural Studies and is the founder and artistic director of a very important storytelling foundation in Jamaica. And of course, she's used the art of storytelling to explore culture, identity, environment, and human development. She has received a badge of honor for meritorious service for Jamaican culture and holds the Order of Distinction officer class for her contribution to the development of the literary arts in Jamaican culture. Ladies and gentlemen, without further ado, I invite the lady who is the founder and director of Anansi Sound Splash, the International Storytelling Conference and Festival staged annually here in Jamaica, and of course, a woman who is just a bastion of excellence when it comes to Jamaican culture. Ladies and gentlemen, Dr. Amina Blackwood Meeks performing Wilderness.
Wildlife.
Wildlife.
Wild.
Wild
and out of order.
So maybe my mind was in the wilderness.
Maybe
my sincere apologies.
No, maybe that's where the
wildlife
live, out there in the wilderness. One, two, three, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, 1 and 20, 2 and 20, 3 and 4 and 5 and 6 and 20, 27, 28, 29. See how no love ramp? 1 and 30, 2 and 30, 3 and 4 and 5 and 6 and 30. 37, 38, 39. I have a little friend, you see. She not really an out of order child. But she just have to say, "One can't see say the emperor don't have on no clothes." And so them call her little Miss Jingbang. Well, on my way here this morning, I stopped to tell little Miss Jingbang where I was going and why I was going. And she insisted that her most recent experience should be presented to this occasion. And I never want to forget anything, I write it down. 1 and 40, 2 and 40, 3 and 4 and 5 and 6 and 40, 47, 48, 49. Here, look at Miss Jingbang. Imagine, after so much walking, the only work I could get was to survey, count up poor people, so food for the poor could have an exact figure. And that's when I hear a little muttering coming out of the manhole. You know manhole? Who remember manhole? Where them dig up to put back the telephone sinting them so people could talk in their own comfort zone. Well, she said, down in this manhole was a little man, very comfortable. And when she asked him what him doing down there, him say, well, it's them wrong for call it manhole. Him had a little box of scrapsies food. And saw him mumble him out. I saw him grumble about him condition. Hear him. We are not an ungrateful species. We know we have to give the United Nations full credit, even if them don't give we none. And them friends still come to demand 70 cents out of every dollar. But we are not a vengeful species, so we give them credit for trying to serve everybody, even if some get more than others. After all, the world is a big place. 8 million mouths without broth or bread or bed would have make the little old lady run well off her shoes. Coming to him like somebody give a big party and never expect so much people. So them hand get where with the sharing into the first half. And by the time bad manners people turn up late into the second half, the portions have to dwindle down. So some people only get the bun. And it's lightning and thunder, it's brimstone and fire. Cause no one give me nothing for nyam. Well, that is for him explanation as to how come October 16th is World Food Day and October 17th is the International Day of Poverty. He want to know which half name world and which half name international. According to him, trying to figure out these things can drive a person wild. So I intervened to ask her if she never tell him, say the proper name of the thing is International Day for the Eradication of Poverty. She said she tell him. And him ask her if that sound like it means something different. According to him, the only difference is that it take longer to say. And you see like how me hungry? Me can testify that hungry and the long talking do not mix. The brains need little substance to help figure out the intricacies. And people are taking some very simple things, turn into intricacies before them provide me with some delicacies. And them things there drive me wild. It is plain to see that the day after them yam off the food off a fancy china with crystals and silverware and left scraps for me in a cardboard box with not even one plastic fork or a bag juice, them launch the eradication of poverty. Coming to hand out free food to pacify me with them international salad waste. So I ask her, you never tell him, say, it's solid waste? And she say, yes, but hear him. It's the same thing. Them yam out the meat and left the little bone part as weakness and nicer things were there. It is still a ton of leftover garbage from a bunch of food intellectuals. With another I have a scheme speech. Well, maybe them have a scheme, but I don't see the vision. And without vision, the people have no provision. Hackey tree blow away, mango tree blow away, soursop tree blow away. Without vision, that is why them perish. And them things there drive me wild. So him said to her, them send you to measure poverty. Then them can see say if somebody head bigger than the rest of them body and them knee cup look like soup bone, something is radically wrong somewhere. What more measure that need? What kind of instruments them use? What is the ideal body type them looking for? For when your belly touch your back and them can't find your waistline unless you're a muggle, them no must see say you're on the poverty line. When you fall below the line now, what that mean? You're more poor? Or you're not as poor as them who depend the line? Him said that is why him down in the hole. Him find himself below the line, make them figure it out. Confuse up them gizmic and mash up them studies. For when people is talking about him in language that he does not understand, those things drive him wild. And his lightning and thunder, brimstone and fire, for unu no one give me nothing for yam. Look, me too. You see when she tell me to start to wonder how they measure poverty. So him down there I try figure out if them who whops off the food pan food there, they pan the bread line, the train line, or the money line. Is the bread line the pipeline to the money line? For him same call all the time and them do not answer those questions pan hotline. And when him can't find no answer, it drive him wild. She say him ask her if them have a human deprivation index. Something to measure the extent of him wildness. And him take the little survey form from her and say, write this down. My place of birth, a climate hostile to the idea of equality. My present address, key and peace, for the zinc gone, the house gone, the foul coop gone. My name, Mongoose. For everything we go wrong is my name gone abroad. Sly Mongoose, your name gone abroad. My occupation, driving bud from Guinea corn. Profile, I never been to the Olympics, but I broke every record for sustainability. Broken legs, broken arms, broken dreams, so much of me broke up, till I never knew what was destroyed. Rain a fall, breeze a blow. I did not say that, I say every little chicken out a door. And every day where God make I am faced with the same two choices. Live longer or take longer for dead. I've been fossilized before I was young. A displaced Tyrannosaurus on the lookout for food is a terrible sight. But probably them never heard of me. Too hungry for run. Too strong to be hunted into extinction. Me grow anyway. Me, a love bush. But them don't want me as part of the biodiversity. Them are going like this thing named biodiversity. And them things they drive me wild. Him say make them know that I am down in this hole, but me not dead. I hear them planning to charge me for come up and take some sunlight and get a breath of fresh air. But I refuse to be voted most likely to become extinct. Poor me gal, I never know what he said to lick Miss Jingbang. So me glad when she tell me say the little man ask her if she love things like plants. Him say me don't tell you already, everything blow away, mango tree, coconut tree, apple tree. And you love things like animals and other living things beside human beings. She said quick time like the brown fox, she jump in and tell him, yes man, yes, from me little. Hear him. Then what? You wouldn't take up my case. At least recommend me to the Jamaica Society for the Prevention of Cruelty to Animals. Or are you one of those who believe that endangered species are condemned to live forever in desolate, hurricane-blown places? The tree blow away. The mango tree blow away. The ackee tree blow away. The dog blow away. And to save Jamaica, we have a plant. To save Jamaica, another mango tree. To save Jamaica, another breadfruit tree. To save Jamaica, another coconut tree. Save Jamaica. Save Jamaica.
Did have Wally Fisherman, don't it? But quite relevant in the context of poverty. The word them can't eat for true, but it's so important that we raise awareness. And in our own spaces, we look at what we can do to leave no one behind and eliminate poverty. One more round of applause for her, ladies and gentlemen. And the gentleman assisting her with his cornucopia of instruments, beautiful accompaniment. And we say thank you so very much for your storytelling. Now we move, ladies and gentlemen, nicely into our panel discussion, which will wrap things up for our event today. I invite to join me on stage Dr. Arlene Bailey, Senior Research Fellow at Celesis, and Dr. Bailey, in her capacity as a researcher, is currently a Senior Research Fellow at the Sir Arthur Lewis Institute of Social and Economic Studies at Celesis, and has served as an Associate Dean for Research and Innovation in the Faculty of Social Sciences at the University of the West Indies Mona campus. Arlene's research areas include information and communication technologies, ICTs for development, community and social informatics, with a focus on policy and interventions for sustainable development and social interventions. Ladies and gentlemen, please put your hands together for her as she comes. And she'll be joined by Dr. Stephen Kerr, Director, Policy Analysis and Research at the Ministry of Education, Skills, Youth and Information. And Dr. Kerr is a distinguished Jamaican educator and policy leader, currently serving as director within the Ministry of Education, Skills, Youth and Information. He holds a Doctor of Philosophy in Education from the University of the West Indies, Mona, and has more than 30 years of experience across secondary and tertiary education, research and policy analysis. Put your hands together for Dr. Kerr, ladies and gentlemen. And of course, his participation in today's launch will help connect the education metrics to the broader poverty reduction strategies and human capital development in Jamaica. Let's also invite Mrs. Shelley-Ann Edwards, Director, Social Protection and Gender Unit in the Planning Institute of Jamaica, PIOJ. And of course, she is keen on social policy and development as an analyst with over 2 decades of experience in national development planning, coordination, monitoring, and evaluation, primarily in the areas of social protection and poverty reduction. Her professional and voluntary service focus has been on improving the quality of life of families and vulnerable groups, including children, youth, persons with disabilities, and the elderly. Put your hands together once again for Mrs. Shelley-Ann Edwards. And that rounds out our panel. So, ladies and gentlemen, I know that thank you so very much to each of you for being here this morning. It's now afternoon, in fact, so we thank you so very much for spending your time with us today for this very, very important launch. So I want to start off by just getting, firstly, the reaction of each of you to the findings of the report that we saw this morning. And I'll begin with Dr. Kerr, and then I'll move to Mrs. Edwards, and then to you, Dr. Bailey, in that order.
Let me say that what we do at the Ministry of Education, in terms of creating better outcomes for our students, in creating inclusivity in our offerings, this particular index have basically targeted us to know what to do, which areas to target, which set of students we ought to be looking extra at, capacity building, partnerships with other IDPs and communities. And one of our ultimate goals is to expand technical and vocational education for our youngsters to make better life of themselves in the future. So much of what we have learned from this index is putting our work in a context to do better, to target better for Jamaicans.
Certainly. So you're seeing where this data could potentially help us to improve our outcomes and how we do things here in Jamaica.
Okay, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for that question. Sitting here reminds me of another launch that we had in 2018, March. And that was the launch of the National Policy on Poverty and National Poverty Reduction Program. And today, it further highlights the very important work that the government of Jamaica, the PIOJ and its partners, is doing to ensure that poverty is highlighted as a very important national issue. And so the MPI, I believe, underscores that the National Poverty Reduction Program was a move in the right direction. And having today another measure, another set of evidence that can help us to understand the dynamics of poverty and to develop further strategies and to strengthen the existing strategies to address poverty is absolutely important. And I want to applaud the PIOJ and the larger government and its partners, both internal and external partners, for this very pivotal moment.
Dr. Bailey.
Thank you, Mr. Keys, and good afternoon, everyone. Also conveying congratulations and commendations to the PIOJ, CDB, OPHI, and the team for the production and calculation of this MPI. In terms of its usefulness,
there are many ways in which it could be utilized to guide policy planning, to do further research, as mentioned by Mrs. Johnson, in looking at the particular areas for further targeting. One of the areas which might be useful would be continuing the focus groups, continuing the work in the communities, as explored in the presentations as well, to get the feedback from the participants, from those who are considered multidimensionally poor, to see what factors and the best approaches to reduce and alleviate poverty.
Indeed. Now, I'm going to come to you, Dr. Kerr, and just to set some more context, quality education is really pivotal for sustainable development of human and social capital, and we speak about that all the time. The education is multi-pronged, and how it helps to take people out of poverty is so, so important. So in this context, how does the ministry view education's role in reducing multidimensional poverty, and what policy levers are most effective for improving educational outcomes among vulnerable households?
A very good question, and thank you for that. What we're trying to do at the ministry is to ensure from very early, from early childhood, we're creating a policy called pathway policy. This is probably the most useful policy that we have ever developed at the ministry. It speaks to ensuring that everybody from K to 13 develop a standard that would take them to the next level. And so we're ensuring that a set of standards exist in terms of curriculum, in terms of getting ahead of life, that there are a set of standards that starts at K and finish at 13, and each level moves to the next. So a child can't move to the next level until he has mastered the standards relating to each level. And so that pathway policy is going to create a set of Jamaicans in the future that are ready for work, that have the standards, global standards, to get ahead in life. And that's one important feature of what we're doing. The other thing that we're doing, and we're doing it in such a way that it's typical to what we want to do in reducing poverty. So I'll give you an example. We created a policy recently that every student who goes to Heart up to level 4 gets this education free of cost. That's attacking poverty at a level. CXC fees, City and Guild fees, transportation to school, lunch at school, breakfast at school. There's a set of students in a program called NSLIP. NSLIP, we identify the poorest of schools in Jamaica. We identified 254 schools that we thought had some issues in terms of learning. And we have developed a program that will make them better in maths and English literacy and numeracy, and focusing on getting them employable, teaching them entrepreneurship. And so we are actually attacking poverty at the school level by doing all of these things. And you might not see it as important, but in the long run, what we're going to have is a set of students. I don't know how many you remember people going to school for 5 years and coming out with zilch. That will never happen again. And so what we have is a set of students who will move from, how many people went to sixth form? Some years ago, 2,000 people got to sixth form. We have 24,000 people going to sixth form right now in Jamaica. Chances are we're creating a set of students who will have occupational certification at the end of 2 years. They'll never be poor, in my estimation.
Very, very critical points you've made there that spoke about the various pathways that many students are now benefiting from, ensuring that there are multiple streams of accessing education, which is the critical leveler in our society. And for sure, we know that this new data that you're going to be getting from the MPI will help to also further break down how do you reach many of these students who may fall in particular categories. Let me come to you, Mrs. Edwards. Given that rural areas account for about 71% of the MPI poor. Despite representing less than half of the population, how might resource allocation and public spending be adjusted, in your view, to address this regional disparity that we're seeing based on the data?
Okay, thank you for that question. So the data that we have been seeing prior to this MPI information on income or consumption data has been showing for years as a trend that poverty is more prevalent within rural areas. So that finding is not surprising. However, what this does is add an additional level of detail in terms of the proportion. So as we have been hearing all morning, the MPI is able to provide further depth of information and also the dynamics that are associated with poverty, deprivation, and well-being. So there are a number of programs and policies that are targeting persons within rural areas. However, I do believe that there is need for greater emphasis on overall rural development. And I believe that in so doing, several elements that have been highlighted, we can zoom in a little bit more on that. I just want to note within that vein that the National Poverty Reduction Program is a multi-sectoral approach. It is over 80 programs that are being coordinated. And these programs, they cut across various areas: health, education, housing, etc. And within each of those areas, then focus is being placed on those who are in rural areas. So it is very important that we recognize that it is not just a one entity approach, a one program approach, but several efforts have to be coordinated in order to make that kind of impact in rural poverty. We have been seeing figures trending down over the years, but it remains the most stubborn area. And definitely, if we are going to be having evidence-based policy making, of course, our budgets have to also be responsive to what it is that the data is showing. And certainly, I do believe that a lot of effort has already gone into reaching poor and vulnerable in rural areas, but it's certainly something we need to keep an eye on and to continue to work towards deliberately.
Absolutely, identifying where there may be the need to shift or adjust, yes, where spending priorities might have been seen as prerogative at that particular time, but based on what we're seeing now, we may need to adjust to fill those gaps to ensure we leave no one behind.
Certainly.
Let me come to you, Dr. Bailey, and we want you to give us a little bit more of an academic perspective, because the reality is this information will also help to guide even more research and deepen the kind of analysis that we'll be able to do. So could you share with us a little bit more on how the MPI will deepen our understanding of poverty compared to traditional income-based measures?
Okay, thank you. So the MPI highlighted certain particular indicators, for example, the NIS contributions and the collection of garbage. As what was interesting is that it highlighted this as both for the poor and non-poor, and then when taken as part of the MPI itself, it was key indicators that were affecting levels of poverty. In relation to the use of the data and the strengthening of the synergies across the academic use for academic purposes and for further research. There are many ways in which it could be used combined with existing data, as mentioned on the monetary poor, looking at some of the SDGs and the Vision 2030 goals and the impact. The MPI is also highlighting many of the interlinkages. So when we're referring to, for example, the NIS, the contributions to NIS, it also highlights or links to the employment, those outside the labor force, the unemployed, and we're seeing, for example, the intensity. So what was also interesting in the findings was related to the deprivations and the average intensity across various groups that we may target through our research. So it would be research and practice that we would be working with. The MPI also highlighted the particular groups, children, persons with disabilities, and then, of course, the implications of disasters and shocks. And so these are all elements that would be taken into consideration in planning research and looking at the ways, the implications, and the ways in which research could be further utilized in communities to support the reduction of poverty.
Absolutely, and that's a very important thing because the data is there. You'll be able to get even more granular in how some of these impacts are realized, and that could help us to have an appreciation of what we can do in our own spaces as private sector to help to reduce the deprivation that we're seeing amongst various groups. Now, Dr. Kerr, education deprivation made up the second largest contribution, about 23.9% to multidimensional poverty in 2018. And though it fell to fourth in 2019 at about 20.8%, my question to you is, how can the data from the MPI inform or complement existing education sector plans to ensure that the interventions are better targeted to address multidimensional deprivation? And you mentioned some of the ways so far, but could you maybe get a little bit more granular for me based on what we know from the latest data?
All right, so we had a report, a reform, comprehensive reform of the education system with 365 recommendations. We have seriously targeted about 100 of those recommendations. Some of the recommendations to come have some implications towards getting more of our youngsters completing secondary school. One of the things that we're doing right now is a research on multi-grade schools. Multi-grade schools are those small schools in communities all over rural Jamaica where there is one teacher teaching two sets of students. And we want to do a research on that, or we have done the research already. What we're doing is analyzing the data as we speak as to, are there any benefits to having these small schools all over Jamaica? There are about 300 of them. Small schools across Jamaica where students are not getting the same quality education as they would in a normal school with one teacher per group. And so we think that that will help the government towards making a decision on multi-grade school, whether we keep them, whether we transport students to a bigger school, amalgamate these schools. So those are decisions that are pending relating to poverty and our small schools and so forth. We have introduced a rural bus service that will take kids to school at minimal or no cost. And we think that's an initiative towards getting students to school, those who are absent from school for any lengthy period of time. We've also integrated technology. And you've heard about tablet in school and own your own device. And we have moved to ensure that 723 schools across Jamaica have technology to work with. And we think that's the beginning of it. We have also moved some of their books into electronic devices. And so you can, rather than buy a book, the books will be on their devices and they have access to it. And we think these are important steps towards getting more people, more students, especially those who are poor, to get an education with minimal or no cost. We've also tried, or we're going to, ensure that the number of students in Jamaica who gets to tertiary is going to be increased, magnified. We're going to magnify the amount of students who get to tertiary. And so what we're trying to do is to reduce the cost of tertiary, either by way of scholarships, bursaries, and for those programs that the government of Jamaica deems important, we're looking at zero or low student loan rates for those programs. And so we're ultimately trying to get more people into tertiary. And the more people into tertiary, I can tell you, the better the country is. Any program you see, Trinidad, Vision 2030, Jamaica, Vision 2030, you get one tertiary graduate in every household, chances are that household won't be in poverty. And that's one of the things we're working on.
Certainly. So you spoke of a number of tangible areas. I mean, and I know some people in the audience may be asking further, how are we going to get to that? But that may be a follow-up question for another day, because the granularity of it, we may not be able to provide for us. But very, very insightful on some of those very real examples of how we are looking to close that gap, because transport has been a concern for some students, but we've now filled that gap. For some, food, nutrition is another concern, but we have some school feeding programs. So you've given those examples. But let me come to you, Mrs. Edwards. As Director of the Social Protection and Gender Unit at the PIOJ, let's look at the reality that the MPI shows that children, female-headed households, and households with persons living with disabilities face higher poverty rates. How should policies then be adapted to better protect these vulnerable groups?
Okay, thank you. So again, we are not surprised based on those findings. The issue of female-headed households, and there are intersectionalities with each of these variables. So consider a female-headed household living in the rural area with someone in that household having a disability and so forth. So I do believe that as we examine our programs, our policy response, we ought to zoom in a little bit more carefully, ensuring that, for example, case management, we strengthen areas of case management to be able to identify the various needs and to build important responses for these vulnerable groups. We are, as you have heard all day, that we are very cognizant of the UN principle of leaving no one behind. We, within the PIOJ, under the National Poverty Reduction Program, have developed a Leaving No One Behind toolkit. And this toolkit is able to assist various ministries, departments, agencies, non-governmental organizations with identifying first and foremost who are these vulnerable groups that might be left behind in our programming, and to also to address the issues that they face. With regards to our rural area and females, we have a number of programs addressing entrepreneurship and strengthening livelihoods in those areas. We have a National Council for Persons with Disabilities. We also ensure that we mainstream the issue of disability within policy responses, and to also ensure that there is the gender lens. And I believe we need to push more in terms of our data, how we manage data, how we provide data for decision making, that it is disaggregated, that we can look at these vulnerable groups, these issues at a more micro level, and to respond accordingly. So absolutely. Sometimes when we look at the statistics, we want to address the majority. But there are instances in which we have to look at the minority, you know, those who fall between the cracks. It is not sufficient as a country for us to say we have achieved a certain level and that's excellent. But we are also ensuring that those who we have not reached, because they are probably hardest to reach, are also a part of what we are pursuing relentlessly.
And sometimes reaching those smaller groups may also help to fill the wider gap in a way that you may not have imagined. So absolutely,
yes,
that
inclusive
focus,
development is what we're after.
Inclusive development is certainly critical. And speaking of, you know, inclusive development and looking at the realities of this day and age, we cannot have this conversation, Dr. Bailey, without talking about access to information and communication technologies. And the reality is that there is a major gap in that regard. We saw it during the COVID-19 pandemic when it became online learning, but we had a number of students who were not able to access education in a fulsome way because many of them lacked that kind of technology. So I wanted to bring you in, Dr. Bailey, using your ICT research for development background here to talk to us about the idea of access to information and communication technologies and how that engagement with the population and inclusion of that very critical space is important to the strategies that should be used by government and the private sector to help to close those gaps. And how do you see that happening?
Yes, thanks. A very important point and very useful in terms of what is needed to build for the future. Right now, we know we're looking at the era of AI, artificial intelligence. We have to be very careful with the type of data that we utilize, the type of information that we share. We know the process of the data collection for the MPI and for sharing among all the stakeholders and relevant persons. It has been very robust, and the indicator of the digital access, that was one of the areas noted in the MPI, that the proportion of persons, and it was measured as whether they had a working device, so tablet, phone, computer, and whether they had access to the internet. So in the provisions, in the spaces related to the use of ICTs, there are many approaches, whether it should be community-based, should it be, you have for example, tablets in schools, are the children taking the tablets home as well and sharing with persons in the community or the household the knowledge that they have learned? For internet access, you have, for example, community Wi-Fi points. Previously, there were also, and they continue to be, the community access points in the form of a community center. So you have both the social aspects and the learning, the intergenerational connections, as well as the public access, which all have to be monitored, especially for our children, as they, yes.
Because the other challenges are there as well, that you know that there are other dangers that lurk in the digital space too. So.
Yes, yes. So the data is also a very important part of the information sharing landscape, as mentioned, and how we can all collaborate, have particular hubs and systems where everything is connected. You know, the Prof. Alkire mentioned the Multidimensional Vulnerability Index in Honduras, and one was done post-pandemic by the university and partners, which is one of the areas that could also be used to collaborate. The Salises and the university have also been exploring digital access and the particular indicators related to poverty indices, and access and usage as well, how it is utilized, all very important in the overall landscape.
Certainly. Thank you so very much, Dr. Bailey. Well, ladies and gentlemen, I now take the opportunity to invite your questions. We do have I know many of you will have a few questions that you might have made note of, but I know my expert panel have certainly been very, very keen in responding to their various regards and what the areas that they have as focus for their respective portfolios. But we know you have some questions in the audience, and we have a roving microphone, so I'm inviting you at this time to raise your hand as is customary. We will take those questions, or is it that all of the information was so clear and you have all your questions answered that you have no questions? Do I take that as a yes? I don't believe that. But it means, though, that my panelist has done an exceptional job in articulating the usefulness of the MPI and how important it is in ensuring that we leave no one behind. So I want to take this opportunity to say thank you so very much to my panelists, Dr. Arlene Bailey, Senior Research Fellow at Salisis at the University of the West Indies, Dr. Stephen Kerr, Director, Policy Analysis and Research at the Ministry of Education, Skills, Youth and Information, and Mrs. Shellyan Edwards, Director, Social Protection and Gender Unit at the PIOJ. Thank you so very much for sharing with us this afternoon. Put your hands together for them, ladies and gentlemen. And I invite you to take your seats. So with no more questions, of course, to make this event possible, it takes a number of hands and hearts coming together. Of course, as you heard, this has been a long time coming, but we are so very grateful that we get the opportunity to present to you this historic document. So to give you the official thank yous, it is my distinct pleasure to invite Mr. Renick Thomas, the Senior Policy Analyst at the Planning Institute of Jamaica, PIOJ, where he works within the Policy Research Unit. His work focuses on social policy analysis, poverty and welfare measurement, and evidence-based policy development to support national planning and decision-making. But what's not on his introduction is probably the most important thing, is that he's a past student of St. Jago High School. So, please put your hands together for Renick Thomas, who has the privilege of giving the vote of thanks.
Thank you so much to my fellow Raven, Javon, and good afternoon, everyone. I'll try that again. Good afternoon, everyone. It is indeed my distinct honor to be able to present this vote of thanks to you today at the launch of Jamaica's National Multidimensional Poverty Index. And the journey to develop this index was truly a collaborative process, and this launch is indeed a testament to the commitment of all of the partners present, and I want you all to just give yourselves a round of applause for the work that you have done up until today. On behalf of the Planning Institute of Jamaica, which spearheaded the development of this index with the support of the Oxford Poverty and Human Development Initiative, OPHI, and the Caribbean Development Bank, I extend sincere thanks to all who contributed to the successful launch of this important national tool. I want to especially thank the households, communities, and individuals that participated in the Jamaica Survey of Living Conditions. Of course, the data for the MPI came from the JSLC, and the willingness of those participants to share their lived experiences made it possible to measure multidimensional poverty that reflects the realities of the ordinary Jamaican. We also acknowledge the critical role of Statin, whose data collection for the JSLC provided the empirical foundation for this work. We further recognize, and we had presentations today from our development partners, the Caribbean Development Bank for its financial support, as well as OPHI for its technical guidance, and the academic institutions, civil society organizations, and individuals for their methodological input, participation in consultations, and their constructive feedback. We also thank the members of the MPI Steering Committee who gave invaluable input to the development of the index. Additionally, we recognize, and we had Mrs. Shellyan Edwards on the panel today, who spoke about the National Poverty Reduction Program Committee, as well as the National Social Protection Committee for their steadfast work in advancing Jamaica's social policy agenda. Special thanks is extended to the technical consultant, the technical team, as well as the staff of the Social Policy Planning and Research Division of the PIOJ, particularly the Policy Research Unit, to which I belong, as well as the Corporate Services Division and Corporate Affairs Marketing and Communication Division of the PIOJ, whose behind-the-scenes efforts made today's launch possible. We especially want to thank as well our distinguished panelists for their thoughtful insights, and I'm sure everyone enjoyed the panel discussion. Is that right? All right. We also thank our venue hosts, our event planning partners, and the media representatives who are here today, whose coverage will ensure that the findings and significance of this report will reach the wider public. We also thank the Jamaica Association for the Deaf, who provided their interpretation services today. We also want to thank Javon Keys for a job well done as moderator. Thank you so much, Javon. And finally, we want to thank you, ladies and gentlemen, for your attendance here today. The last couple of months, and especially this last week, have involved tireless hours of work from a dedicated team, of which I am happy to be a part in bringing this event to completion. We can finally rest tonight until the next event, but the work has now only begun. Let us now join together in commitment to use this data that was presented today, not as the end of a process, but as a tool to drive meaningful change and inform policy, which will eventually lead to the improvement of the lives of our fellow Jamaicans. So please stay connected and let us continue the conversation over lunch. Thank you.
And with that said, ladies and gentlemen, I don't have much to add but to say before you head to lunch, we do have a QR code that is coming up because we need you to ensure that you share with us your feedback. It is absolutely critical that you share with us your thoughts on today's event as well as the findings of the presentations and the MPI overall. And as we bring that QR code up to get that information from you, we also want to remind you that the MPI for 2023, as well as the Jamaica Survey of Living Conditions, will be coming to you to reflect the 2023 data. So you want to look out for that. You also want to look out for the Best Practices Symposium that's going to be taking place later on this year. And of course, the Dialogue for Development lecture series, which is an important part of the calendar from the PIOJ. So the QR code is displayed there, encouraging you to go ahead and scan that QR code and ensure that you share with us feedback on today's event and, of course, the report that is so very important to the development process going forward. We also need to ensure that you check pages 55, 56, and 58 in your document. That's pages 55, 56, and 58. There has been an update to the document, so we want to ensure that you have the correct thing. How will they know it's correct? And you will realize, you will know it is the correct document because you will recognize an amendment to those pages. So we're asking you to ensure that you have the latest and correct version of that, and that's pages 56, 55, so 55, 56, and 58. So you will recognize an amendment to those pages, and if you're not seeing that amendment, it means that you should just check the team from the PIOJ on the outside to get the corrected copy. Of course, you know that the PIOJ also has its quarterly press briefings, and you want to look out for that. So, without further ado, ladies and gentlemen, it has been my absolute pleasure being your master of ceremonies. My name is Javon Keys, and until next time, we invite you to join us for lunch. It is being served buffet style, and it will be on the right and left upon your exit of this room. So we thank you so very much for joining us. Until next time, enjoy lunch and take care.